Dr. Price, I have some Patreon questions. For those who support me on Patreon, thank you so much. Please consider also helping support Dr. Robert M. Price. Dr. Bob, question from Greg M. Thank you for the support, my friend. I'm curious what his thoughts are on the mention of Jesus appearing to Simon Peter in Luke 24:34 by the two who went to Emmaus. It is the only mention of this appearance and seems kind of forced in. Is there a chance this was added into an already existing story in order to make it fit with the Corinthians Creed, or in the event that the creed is later to advocate for Petrine priority?
Yeah, I think you're sharp-eyed there, and it certainly does read like that. I mean, in 1 Corinthians, it says he appeared to Peter and the 12 and all this, or Cephas and the 12, and you'd think that there would be a story about that. And of course, according to one theory, that's a pretty good one, I think, there is a story, but it's been misplaced, that originally the "you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church" was with Jesus glowing like the sun and all that. It could be that that was originally a resurrection appearance, the resurrection appearance to Peter. And so it would, Jesus is declared Son of God by the heavenly voice, and then Jesus kind of passes the honor and the authority on to his vice regent on earth before he ascends. And in fact, the cloud covering Moses, Elijah, and Jesus, Bultmann suggested, was originally the ascension. And it says that presently, it says that they saw only Jesus, and when the other two disappeared. And Bultmann thought originally this was like in the beginning of Acts, that Jesus was received into that cloud. That was the ascension following the resurrection. And that's quite possible. But whether that is true or not, I think it is, actually. I think Bultmann was right, as almost always. But let's assume it's not, and the idea of an appearance to Peter was later. That's exactly what you said is exactly what it would look like if you were just trying to shoehorn somebody was reluctant to create a story about it and said, well, where would this fit? Okay, right there. So that is a powerful theory. But yet a third option, that's sort of second and a half. It seems to me possible that there's been a bit of a mix-up between Cleophas and Cephas, and that the two disciples on the road to Emmaus were Peter and John, or whoever, because Luke likes to put the two of them together, but it doesn't say, and it doesn't really matter, and that when they return to Jerusalem and find the other disciples, who is it that says the Lord is risen and has appeared to Peter? Well, I think possibly that originally that was assigned to the two who just got in, and that one of them was Peter. And so their declaration is, holy mackerel, you never believe who we just saw. And that it's Cephas, changed slightly to Cleophas, and that it means Peter, Simon Peter. That's sort of a pet theory of mine, and there is no way to know. But perhaps the most likely is this theory you have suggested. That is a good one.
It is interesting that the Emmaus story too. Like, do you think it's squeezed in, or do you think it's part of the original, like what the narrative should be there? Is this...
I think originally there was almost no dialogue in it. You can cut out most of the speechifying between Jesus and the others, and you have a coherent little episode where they're walking along with a guy they don't know who he is, and then when they're having dinner with him, bingo, they say, hey, this is Jesus, and then he disappears. I suspect that that is an earlier story, but that Luke has added the dialogue because it sounds so much like what he has Jesus say subsequently, that wasn't written in the scriptures that the Messiah had to suffer, and I told you these things in advance. I mean, it sounds very much like Lukan lines put in the mouth of Jesus. So I tend to think that, you've got an early story, which, by the way, was modeled on, or at least strikingly parallel to an old Asclepius story, some 200 or 300 years old by the time Luke was written, where this woman has been to Epidaurus, where the big Asclepium was, the big healing shrine. And in fact, the story comes from a testimonial tablet that was posted on the outside of the Epidaurus Asclepium, because they had like satisfied customers giving testimonies that they posted, like commercials. And it says that this woman, Sostrata, had come there because she was due to deliver a baby and could not do it. So it's becoming more and more dangerous. So they take her to the Asclepium, and she sleeps there overnight, expects a dream vision of Asclepius telling her what to do, but nothing happens. So they leave for home again, and she's on a stretcher. She's and suddenly they meet a guy who turns out to be Asclepius, and he says, "Look, put her down, we'll fix this." And it turns out the woman wasn't even pregnant. It was a bunch of worms that were making her puff out, but she's healed, and that's it. I mean, that is so darn close. It may just be the same type of story, but what's the difference? And so I think that part of it, the basic outline, was a pre-Lucan story, but he's introduced all this stuff, his unique theory that you find in Acts as well. What was the significance of the death of Jesus? Not that it redeemed anybody by his blood or anything. There is one aberrant passage in Acts 19 that's textually dubious as well. But in the preaching of Peter, and then twice in Luke 24, there's the idea he had to undergo suffering and death and be vindicated by God, or he wouldn't have fulfilled the prophecies, which they would have included Isaiah 53 and Psalm 22, which of course are not prophecies of anything. But that if he had, it's a necessary credential. Had he skipped that, he couldn't have been the Messiah. So you got it exactly wrong. These sufferings don't show Jesus as a failed Messiah. Oh, well, back to the drawing board. No, you idiots, don't you see? This is what had to happen to the Messiah, and that's how you know Jesus was. And so that's a uniquely Lucan thing, and so in its present form, it's certainly Lucan theological propaganda.
Final touch on that is when they then recognize it's him. I think you've gone on record saying or suggesting it's possibly the Eucharist, the presence.
It's got to be.
That's what I was going to say. What if it originally, I mean, maybe they thought this out the gate, because John is already talking about the presence of the God in eating of the fruit. But I wondered if, just elaborate on that. I'd rather not put words in your mouth. So.
Well, how do they recognize Jesus? In the breaking of the bread at the table with Jesus. And then he disappears. Now, if that isn't about the invisible presence of the risen Christ in the Eucharistic breaking of the bread, come on. I mean, that's what it says, even if somehow Luke didn't get it. But I assume he did. I think he's saying, that's like the bread and fish multiplication. That's a little less obvious, but it seems to be about that too. That this is plain old food, right? But if it's used in the Eucharistic ritual, there is a great multiplication of power to it. There's spiritual sustenance, and that's what the multiplication idea really refers refers to. And I think there is some evidence that in North Africa or somewhere there were Christians that didn't have bread and wine, but bread and fish. And now if that's the case, that means they either understood those stories that way or those stories presuppose that version of the Eucharist. But the Emmaus thing, that just has to be the way, again, the way it's written now. The original version needn't have ended quite that way, but nonetheless, I think that is the larger point. And the thing is, that's important not just for Eucharistic theology, which I take seriously. I don't scoff at theology. I'm a respectful dissenter. But the thing is, if that's what Luke meant, he's not really trying to tell you what happened. It's so obviously a symbolic story. It's just like in the Great Commission in Matthew 28. Go out there, baptize them all, teach them to obey what I've said, and I'm with you until the end of the age. No ascension or anything. Does that mean Jesus is walking along the road with them from town to town preaching? No, but it's like it's an open end leading to the reader's own experience. It's not really a historical scene. And so you wonder, well, what else is not really supposed to be historical?
Thank you.